Right. Okay. So it's a couple of minutes past 4. So let's make a start. Welcome to our webinar number 12 in the Biomass Connect series. And the topic today is harvesting your crop, which is pretty timely. So we did our harvest here in Aberystwyth over the last couple of weeks. My name's Judith Thornton. I'm part of the Biomass Connect team here in Aberystwyth University. And I'm going to be facilitating today's workshop. Okay, so before we get into the main guts of the webinar, for those, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Biomass Connect project, but we've got 8 biomass trial demonstration sites across the UK, 11 different crops, and over 250,000 individual plants. We have a bunch of open days and demonstration events, and you'll see us at various agricultural shows. So we were at Low Carbon Ag a few weeks ago, and our next event that we'll be at is probably going to be Groundswell. So you'll see us around and about over the summer. The Biomass Connect website is a great source of information for anyone interested in biomass crops. So a bunch of technical articles, and then latest news, events, fact sheets, that kind of thing. So that's all available on the Biomass Connect website. So okay, so back to the subject of this webinar then. So this webinar is going to be recorded and it will be on YouTube after the event. So you can go back and catch up on it there, and all our other webinars are also on YouTube. So if you have any questions as we go along for our speakers, please type them into the Q&A box. And we'll have questions after each speaker, and then if we've got time, maybe some sort of closing remarks and questions that might apply to both speakers towards the end. First speaker today is going to be Jamie Rickerby. So Jamie Rickerby runs Willow Energy and has got a huge amount of experience on planting and harvesting short rotation coppice willow. Clearly, one of the key things about making willow a sensible investment for farmers is to be able to minimise planting and harvesting costs. So Jamie's been funded as part of the Biomass Feedstock Innovation Programme to develop new planting and harvesting machinery. So hopefully he's going to mention that as we go along, and some of you will have seen his robotic tracked machine at various shows and things. Okay, so yeah, over to you, Jamie. Floor is yours.
Thanks, Judith, and hello everyone. I'm Jamie at Willow Energy, based up in Carlisle in Cumbria, right in the north of England. We're going to talk about, obviously, willow and willow harvesting. As Judith alluded to, we've also developed some robotic equipment that will hopefully help us produce more willow cuttings for planting going forward and automate that process. But today we're going to kind of focus on the actual harvesting process. So just for people who don't really know much about willow, I thought I'd just give a couple of minutes just to explain what willow is, or short rotational coppice is, and how it kind of works. So willow, or SRC, is a shrub variety of willow. It's not a tree. It doesn't have a tapping root. It has the root system's mat out basically. And in a traditional plantation that we'd normally plant around about 15,000 cuttings, or 20 centimetre cuttings per hectare. Which is a kind of a standard plantation. I think we've probably moved to planting around about 16,500 to 17,000 cuttings per hectare, which just allows us for any kind of discrepancies, any gaps, any kind of rods that haven't failed, which is to hopefully get us back to around about the 15,000 cuttings per hectare. When we plant with ideally between 6 and 8 different varieties of willow, SRC varieties of willow, just to get a diversification within the crop, which will allow for it to cope with disease, pests, and obviously climate and weather conditions as well, because the variety, each different variety have got different characteristics. But we won't go too much into those details at the moment. Just something else to think about when harvesting is headlands. The machinery is big. It's the big forage harvesters, and they need space to turn around. And over the years, we have experienced sites where you've got maybe 6 to 8 meters of headland at the end, and that can be quite difficult for the machines to get around. So ideally, you want around about 10 to 12 meters at either end, just to make it a lot easier for the machines to get around and kind of line up to the next row nice and straight. When we are thinking about harvesting, we kind of think, well, when is the right time to harvest? And there are a couple of factors you need to think about here. And the first one is, what is the material or the chip that is produced in the harvest going to be used for? Is it going to be going into a big industrial facility, or is it going to be going into a small local biomass boiler on a farm or estate? Or is it going for something completely different, like a compost? The reason I say that is because these markets usually have kind of different specification when it comes to the size of the chip they require. Some require a 44 to 50 mil chip, whereas others require a 20 to 30 mil chip. And then some of the compost guys want down to about 12 mil in chip size. So you need to think about that and whether the harvester or the contractor you're using is able to provide the spec of chip that is required. Then we need to think about, well, is the crop ready to be harvested? Is there enough growth? Normally, I would say that the first year when we plant it is the establishment year, and then after that, you're looking at between a 2 to 4 year, probably traditionally around about 3 years after the first year to harvest. And that's when you're going to get a decent amount of growth, and your bark to wood ratio is going to be ideal for willows, so for combustion. So you want more wood than bark, obviously. There are other applications where you might actually want more bark than wood as well. So these things need to be thought about before you actually start the harvesting process. But traditionally for harvesting for biomass, for combustion, we'd be looking at the base of a stem to be around about between 50 and 60 millimeters in diameter. Not all of them have to be that size, but when you're looking around, you can see quite a few that are around about, say, 50 to 60 up to 70 centimeters, sorry, millimeters in diameter, not centimeters. It would struggle. So that's what you're looking for, and that's where you normally get after a 3-year period. The harvesters can cope with the crop getting to 5 years and a bigger crop, but what will happen is it'll just take a lot longer and it won't be as efficient to harvest the crop. We then would look at the weather and ground conditions. What's they like? Because obviously willow is meant to be harvested. So going back to 2 to 4 year harvest cycle, and then ideally you want to be harvesting willow in between October through to March, when the crop is dormant, the leaves have fallen or are falling off, so that you get a much higher quality wood chip that's not full of leaf and grass ideally. But bar this year, actually this season hasn't been too bad, but the past 3 or 4 seasons have been horrendous weather-wise. It basically started raining in October and didn't stop raining until March, April the following year, which has made it very difficult. So you really don't want to be going into a field when it is saturated, because all you're going to do is make a mess. And because this crop is a permanent crop, you cannot then try to get the ruts out of the crop. The ruts will also create compaction and will hold water, which will kind of hold growth back and make it difficult next time for harvesting. When we harvest the crop, the moisture content is roughly about between 48 and 55% moisture. Again, it depends on the time of the season. When you do it, it can vary a little bit, but that's the ideal kind of that's the realistic kind of moisture content that you'll get from the crop. So yeah, you want to walk your crop. You want to make sure that there aren't puddles, or there's going to be areas where you're going to lose a machine or get a machine stuck, because it's just, we've been there, done that, and it's just a nightmare to pull them out, and it just makes a mess and makes everything very inefficient. So the equipment we use to harvest willow is basically a converted forage harvester, which is traditionally used for cutting or chopping grass silage, maize, whole crop kind of crop type of crops. We have 2 of these, and we've modified them to allow them to operate within a willow crop, because obviously you can see it's a big crop. It's obviously taller than the machine, and it can get in amongst the machine and kind of rip pipes off and cables and things off. So the machine needs to be relatively well protected, have a belly plate on it, and then kind of bars and things to keep the crop off the machine. But in ideal conditions, a normal forage harvest that's had some modifications done to it can chop willow. We need to put a specialist willow header on the harvester. You can't use a normal kind of maize or grass pickup for the operation. It does need to be a specific header for chopping willow, which basically has got saw blades on the front, which cuts the willow down at the base and then pulls the willow into the machine, where it is then chopped into wood chip, and then, as you can see in this picture, is then fired into a tractor and trailer running alongside. Now, in conditions like this, late autumn, the leaves have pretty much fallen off, nice sunny day, this setup works an absolute dream. But the reality is that we've had more poor wet seasons than good seasons over the past 10 years, and we've just not been able to get on the field, or if we have, it's not gone well, so we've had to pull out. So that has kind of pushed me into thinking about what are the alternatives. How can we solve this problem? Because this problem doesn't seem to be going away. We seem to have this, if not every year, every other year. So that's where the BFI, the Biomass Feedstock Innovation Programme, came in, and we were fortunate enough to be funded to develop a new piece of harvesting equipment. So this is, the long acronym is the Tracked Harvester Bunker Unloading System, or the BUS, or the new name we're going to call it is called the Class 990 TS, which stands for Tracked Shuttle. So this is a class forage harvester that we have converted to run on tracks. We've built a whole new subframe underneath the harvester. If you look closer, you'll see there's no back wheels on the forager itself. They have been removed, and under there we've got a slewing bearing, a bearing that's the pivot point, which then connects to the tracked bunker that we have designed and built. The idea here is that obviously tracks are going to allow us to get on wetter ground. We've got a much bigger footprint, meaning that we're not going to compact the soil or rot the soil as much. It's going to allow us to get onto wetter ground. I'm not saying it's going to be able to get on absolutely saturated ground. You still need to use some common sense, but it's going to mean that we can chop, chip, and then collect the wood chip, and then take it to the side of the field and then unload it. As you can see in the picture on the left, there's a conveyor. So that'll allow us to unload it straight into either tractor and trailers, or ideally straight into articulated trucks, which is going to mean that we don't have to double handle the material, because traditionally at the moment we have tractors and trailers running alongside. We then go and tip them in a field or some hard standing or a shed somewhere, and then reload, and then having to reload it into trucks at a later date. The idea here is we just do it all in one go, so it should create much more efficient operations. So we're not having to double handling, we don't need as many people, we don't need as many tractors and trailers, and at the same time we're not going to be carting mud onto the road, or hopefully not doing as much damage to the soil. And again, that will help with regrowth on the crop for the coming years. So once you've obviously produced the wood chip with the forage harvesters, you need to think about where you're going to put it, and how is it going to be transported. Are you going to be using it on site? Is it going to be are you going to have it for your own use, or are you going to be selling it on or moving it on to another facility? If you're just going to be using it on your own site, then potentially you can use some hard standing or an old shed or something like that. We'll go into the storage in a bit, but those are the types of things you need to think about. If you look at the bottom right-hand picture, you'll see there's a telehandler on a great big heap of willow chip. You can obviously stack it quite high. You can go as high as you want, really. So you don't need a huge area, but you do need to think about the area because it is still quite a bulky material and it will take up quite a lot of space. If you're going to be taking it longer distances, say, and then putting it into articulated trucks, then you need to think about access for the trucks. Are they going to be able to get in? And more importantly, are they going to be able to get out? Because that can be the problem where they're so heavy that they actually can't get up a little hill or turn around a farmyard. So you need to think ahead before you've got 1,000 tons of wood chip in the yard and think, well, how on earth am I going to get this out of here? So a bit of forethought is required here, but it's amazing how quickly you can move it once you've got all the infrastructure that you've thought about it. There's a number of ways you could dry it, and again, it comes back to what is this material? What is the wood chip going to be used for? Do you need it to go into a small, say, 100 kilowatt boiler, which would require a wood chip of around about 20 to 25%, or is it going to an industrial facility where they need it more like 40 to 45%, or is it going for something else completely different, like say a composting plant where they really don't mind what moisture content it is? So if you look here, the picture on the top left hand corner is basically just a heap of willow which has been left outside. If you look quite close in the picture, you'll see like a dark kind of seam patch at the top of it. That's it. That is basically where that's where it's evaporating, the moisture's come out. What will happen is the pile will heat up and people start worrying, oh, it's catching fire. It's not catching fire. It's 50+% moisture. It's just heating up, and then it's the steam rising out of the heap. And if you were to leave that for say 6 months during the summer months, it will dry down to probably high 30s, possibly even mid 30s, depending on the season. But ideally, if you're going to do that, you do want to turn it. You just kind of move the material around every month or two, again, just to stop it from heating up too much or starting to compost or decompose inside. If you get air through it, it's okay. Then if you look down on the right hand side, they've got a big shed with willow in. So what they've done here is they've actually, I don't know if you can see to the left of the building, there's some willow, there's some chip outside. What I'd always say is leave it outside for the first couple of months, which sounds counterintuitive, but what will happen if you stick it straight into a shed is it will start heating up, condensating, it'll then hit the roof, and then it'll basically rain back down on the chip. So if you leave it outside for a couple of months, it gets rid of a good portion of the moisture, and then put it into a shed. Ideally, a shed that's got air flowing all the way through it. Now, I must say I was a bit skeptical about this process, but this kind of picture, this setup proved me wrong, because you can't quite see, but it's an open-ended shed. It's the air is allowed to travel all the way through, and as I say, after a couple of months, put it in the shed, and they were finding it in the shed for 3 or 4 months, it was coming down to low 30s moisture content, which is fantastic, and it's obviously quite a relatively cheap way to dry. But if you want to get it even drier, or you want to speed up the process, then you're looking at some sort of forced drying system, whether it's a kind of a drying floor system or a more automated system. And these can dry willow chip within 12 to 24 hours. It's phenomenal how quickly they can dry it, and they can get it down to like 10 to 12% in that time. But obviously there is more infrastructure required, and obviously more costs required, but you will end up with a drier wood chip at the end, and potentially with a higher calorific value and probably a higher cost value in the chip as well. So it just depends on what the end use for that material is. And I think that is about it. I'm trying to be as quick as I can. Nope, that's it.
That was great, Jamie. Thank you. I learned lots from that. Please put any questions in the Q&A section on the Teams. So I was just wondering, Jamie, so the tracked harvester thing, does as well as requiring less passes on the land and less machinery, does that actually speed things up significantly? So I mean, could you potentially do more sites in a, given that the window when it's dry enough is likely to be pretty narrow, can you potentially get around more customers, do you think?
The theory, obviously, it's going to take potentially a little bit longer to do a specific job, specific site, because at the moment with the tractors and trailers in ideal conditions, you're continuously chopping, and then once a trailer's full, another one will come alongside and it'll keep filling. But what we've found over the years is there aren't many that many occasions when you can actually run that system at optimal capacity. So my feeling was that rather than trying to get the operation as optimal as possible, it's more about getting a system that's going to allow us to get onto the field and the land more than we would in the current system. So it's not about speeding it up in the sense, it's actually about just extending the window and allowing us to get onto the land when other machinery couldn't.
Okay, and hopefully causing less damage, or being able to do a site that was a bit marginal with normal equipment.
It's also about cost as well. So we're not going to have 2 or 3 other tractors and trailers in the field. So obviously the costs associated, so the labour, the machinery, and also the emissions, and also the fact that we're going to have to, when you're doing with the traditional system, you're actually, every time you chop a row, you're going to be passing over that row twice, one with the forager and then the second time with the tractor and trailer. And it's usually the tractor and trailer that do the more damage than the actual harvester itself. And obviously the harvester's got a track system on, it's got a much bigger footprint. So that's going to, again, reduce the compaction and the damage to the soil.
That's great. Thanks for that. Question in the chat. How much have you modified the chopping system within the forage harvester?
We haven't, in the sense of physically altered it. We've got a different drum in there. We've got quite a special drum in there, which allows us to change the knife configuration inside. So depending on, let's say, the crop, the end use, so the size of the chip, we're able to kind of tweak it to having more knives or less knives. If there's less knives in it, you obviously get a bigger chip. If you have more knives, you get a smaller chip. So I'd say that is really the only internal modification, apart from we've had to put a separate on one of the headers, the Willow headers that we have. It requires extra hydraulic capacity, so I've had to modify in that way. But there are other headers which can literally just clip straight onto the forager. It wouldn't need any modification there. And obviously then it's just the belly plates and the kind of the scaffolding around it to protect it from the actual crop itself.
And so is it a big job to change the number of knives in? So like if you needed to change chip size between different customers?
No, it's you open up at the front and it's a couple of hours. It's not a big job, and it's something you'd want to do, and you'd want to open up regularly anyway, just to check the torque settings on the bolts and the knives and things. So it's not unusual to do that.
That's great. Thanks for that, Jamie. So if any more questions come up for Jamie, put them in the chat and we can come back to them towards the end. So I'd now like to pass on to our second speaker, so Tim Russon. So Tim Russon is of Russon and Sons. And Tim has been involved in the contracting business for decades. Does the business as a whole does muck spreading, drilling, combining, baling, spraying, the usual set of contracting. And he's been harvesting Miscanthus since 2006 in the Lincolnshire area, and now harvests about 4,000 acres a year, all the way through from Suffolk to Yorkshire. Hopefully he's going to tell us a little bit about his machinery, what he uses and why he uses it. As for Jamie, if you've got any questions for Tim as we go along, put them in the chat. Tim, over to you.
Thank you, Judy, for that introduction. You stole a bit of my thunder there, telling everybody what I've been up to for the last 20 years or so. I suppose I first got into harvesting Miscanthus grass because we already had a forage harvester, and it was equipment that we could use out of season harvesting a new crop, and it gave me a new opportunity at a very quiet time of the year, which is the reason why we really got into it. And also the Terra Vesta office were the people that sort of look after the marketing, the harvesting and the growing of the crop were in the next door village, so it just made sense to partner them, and as a result we've grown what we do over the years. You might ask, what is Miscanthus? It's a perennial crop. It's only ever planted once. It's got a lifespan of about 20 plus years. We don't really know how long it is yet. You harvest it once a year after probably the second or the third year of growth, and it grows without any fertilizer. This is a slide of the growing cycle of the crop. In the spring, you'll start to see new shoots appear in the bottom of the crop around about the end of March, beginning of April. It just depends a little bit on the soil temperature when that happens, and it'll reach its full height by the end of September. And after you've had the first frost, that's when it'll start to senesce, and you'll start to see it change from a green colour to a brown colour, which is quite a steady process. It'll take November and December and maybe a bit of January before you see that fully turned brown. As I said earlier, we harvest it annually. We like to start harvesting as soon as we can do in the beginning of the year. Ideally, well, given a choice, the first week of January, but the soil conditions don't always allow you to do that. And we're looking to harvest anywhere in between, or cut it down, anywhere between sort of 25% moisture and probably at the end of the season 14%. The first year of harvest is sort of year 2, year 3, and you'll start to see a mature yield at probably year 4 to 5. So we use a conventional forage harvester, a bit like Jamie with the Willow, which has been modified. We have to make a specialist drum to go in there, take the old drum out. We make a specialist drum to go in, which is trying to break the crop into sort of 30 to 60 centimetre length canes, and we drop that onto the ground underneath the forage harvester. So we're not actually chopping it, we're more breaking it. It's not an exact science, because if you've got a wet crop or a higher moisture crop, you tend to find that your canes break longer. If it's really dry, and they'll smash up a lot smaller. So there's not really a setting that you can get one size fits all. It's just a little bit of a wing and a prayer with some of it. We like to start as soon as the ground conditions allow, or the weather wind will allow, for several reasons. One, the leaf hangs on the crop still. It's not fallen onto the ground, which enables the mace header or the Kemper header that we use for cutting it to operate. You don't end up with all leaf hanging on the points of the machine, which sort of makes a little bit of difference on the cut height, because you want to cut it as low as possible to get the maximum amount of yield. Also, if we can get cutting sooner rather than later, the crop's more has got high moisture content, there's less dust there, which is a lot less risk of fire. There's quite a high fire risk of this, cutting a dusty crop. You've only got to have a bearing fail on the machine or a bit of friction from somewhere, and you can very easily have a fire on your hands, which obviously we do everything we can do to avoid that from happening. Particularly when we finish each field, we blow the machine down. We pay particular attention to cleaning round where the brakes are and the exhaust and the engine, anywhere where there's any chance of getting any heat onto the machine. A 6 metre header is about what we use. Any bigger than that, the swath tends to be too big to drive the forage harvester over, particularly if it's a very good crop. The crop that you can see there in the picture is probably about 6 foot tall. That's will pass underneath the forager relatively easy, but some of the crops can get to be sort of 8-10 foot tall, as high as a cab, if not a bit higher, and that becomes problematic if you've got a swath any bigger than that. The other good thing about being able to cut earlier is if you've got any weed control issues to address, you've got your crop cut and baled and removed off the field before any of the green shoots appear in the sort of late March, early April, and it gives you an opportunity to clean any weeds up with Roundup. Ideally, we're going to we can see the width of the forager, the header there, and that's just as cutting the last part of a field, and you can see a little bit of the swath laid on the headland. The baling of it is baled with a conventional large baler, and there's 2 sizes that you can really go to bale with. You've got a 4x4 bale or a 3x4 bale. The bale weights that were sort of, with a 4x4 bale, you're looking for a bale weight of around about 650 kgs, and that will be ideally at 14% moisture. If you get your bales much heavier than that on a 4x4, you tend to find that the moisture's gone up, and then you come across the problem of strings breaking on your bales because they're just too heavy. 3x4 bale, you're looking at around about a 500 kg bale, somewhere around there, 14% moisture. Above 14% moisture, the burning plants will start to penalise you, and there are storage issues of storing bales above that. They start to get mouldy and heat up. Once you've baled bales, you obviously got to get them off the field. Pretty similar to what Jamie said, you need to have a good storage site, good access, because these bales will have to go out to the burning plant on lorries. Ideally, I would like to chase the bales off the field, because this reduces compaction, which will, if you do compact your field, will impact on next year's crop and yields. The bales need to be on a 4x4 bale. They want to be stacked with the strings on the side. 3x4 bale, you can stack with the strings top and bottom. If they're going to be there for a short time, they won't harm by having them stacked outside. But if you're going to have to leave them there for a long while, ideally they want to go into a shed. If there's no shed available, well, it is possible to stack them outside, but you really need to sheet them, and I've never had a lot of luck with the sheeting stacks. We've always found it very difficult to keep the sheet on. It's quite dangerous being climbing up there and putting the sheet on as well, and yeah, it's not a great experience. One to be avoided if possible. Now, this is previous system that I've just explained to you was all about cutting and baling, where 99% of the Miscanthus grass goes. It is possible to chip harvest Miscanthus grass. Not something that I've done very much of, or if at all. It is possible to do that with a conventional forage harvester with no adaptations or modifications at all to, where you just go and cut the crop and blow it straight into a trailer. If you're going to go and do this type of system, it will be, you need to be later in the system when your crop's probably, or hopefully down at the sort of 14-15% moisture. It's very dusty. You blow it into a trailer, lead it off the field, and take it to your storage site. There again, it's pretty similar to wood chip. I would say ideally store it under a shed in a pyramid, lets the steam out the top if there is any there. And that's about it. I've not really had much experience with this, and I don't know many places that do it. The market for this, if it is going to go down this route, is the biomass market, biomass boilers, and the bedding market. I do believe the bed horses on it, but 99% of the Miscanthus in the country goes straight into bales and then gets burned in energy plants. Has anybody got any questions? Thank you.
That's great. Thanks for that, Tim. Yeah, really interesting. Just kind of yeah. So if anyone's got any questions for Tim, please put them in the chat. In the meantime, one from me. If conditions are really bad, and I mean, I know it's it's an annual harvest, but if conditions are bad and you just can't get onto the land, what happens if you skip a year?
If you skip a year, it makes putting it next year quite difficult, because there's an awful lot of leaf mold in the bottom and the cutter won't work very well. You will get a little bit more yield, but you're basically missing out on a year's harvest. That does happen occasionally. We tend to dread it. We often have to cut the crop with a longer stubble, and then our advice would be to go with a mulch mower and mow the stubble lower, so that it improves the quality of cut that you'll get next year. Because when you get 2 or 3 years growth in the bottom, the Kemper header that we use just won't cut it nicely because there's just too much leaf mold. It hangs on all the points, and yeah, doesn't happen.
Okay, that's interesting, because I was sort of assuming that because you've still got some standing cane, you get some additional. Yeah, you don't lose an entire year's yield.
You'd probably you'd probably get about another 10 to 20% more crop next year, but you wouldn't get 100% more crop.
And it makes your job a nightmare.
Yeah, a nightmare.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And then presumably, because you're, like you say, if you're cutting a little bit higher, then you've actually lost a fair amount of.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And then the high stubble height, the best way to rectify that is to go in with a mulch mower and mow it down to the ground zero again, should I say.
Okay, so that's then an extra pass of machinery on the land.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And do you typically, in terms of moisture content, if it's too wet when it comes off the field, and firstly you've got it in the swaths, do you go back and measure moisture content before you then decide to bale it, or do you just go along?
Very much so. If it's in January, the crop will probably be on the ground for best part of 8 weeks. It's unlikely before, unless we get a season like what we've just had, it's unlikely that you'll be able to get baling before the beginning of March, more like the sort of middle of March, because there's too much ground moisture there, and it's a bit like laying a blanket on the ground. Underneath the swath, it draws the moisture up, and the baling days are very short. So through experience, we sort of know when we're roughly there. We'll go and try it with a baler, maybe take the headlands off, use a moisture meter either on the baler, or take a moisture meter, handheld moisture meter, and stab the bale and check the moisture there. And then when we've got sort of 15% moisture, that's when we'll start to bale.
Okay, so if you cut much later, then it's you don't leave it on the ground for quite so long, and that's because you're saying that you prefer to cut a bit earlier if you can, aren't you?
We want to cut early if we can, because the earlier cut, the earlier chance there is of getting the crop removed from the ground, which then if there is a problem with weeds, you can go in there and put your Roundup on to clean any stubbles up, any grass weeds, that are in there. You've increased the chance of getting your crop off before you get next year's growth starting, because we don't really know what date that'll be. It all depends on the weather, on the weather conditions. But the crop that we cut some crop yesterday, I would imagine that'll be on the ground for probably 3 days before it gets baled.
So because it was much drier when you cut it, or
a lot drier when it's cut. It's had another sort of 2 months to senesce, and
okay.
It's dry now.
Okay.
But there's a lot more dust when we cut it, which is a fire hazard for the machine. And also the leaf that was on there is all dropped onto the floor, which tends to mean we have to just have a slightly higher, not much higher, but slightly higher stubble height. So you're losing a little bit of yield there, but you're gaining on the fact that it's not on the floor for quite so long.
Okay, thank you. And do you notice much difference in how well senesced a crop is between different farms that you go to?
No, not really. I think it probably just depends a little bit on the a good frost on it helps to speed the senescing process up. Inland,
okay.
We often, obviously you get a lot harder frost than what you would do maybe if you was on the Norfolk coast. I maybe noticed a little bit of difference there. They don't hardly get a frost, or don't seem to do, so it might be a tad greener, but this time of year there's not really a lot in it.
Brilliant, thank you, Tim. Can we bring Jamie back as well? And maybe it'd be nice to have both of your reflections really on, I suppose, well, from anybody in the chat, or my sort of first question that sort of applies to both of you really is, how is there lots of scope for improvements in machinery, or is it at the moment the case that there's just not quite enough crop in the ground to justify investing in significant machinery modifications? I mean, is there like so the planter for Miscanthus came across from potato planting. So is there a bit of technology that we haven't yet got in these machines that would just really be an absolute game changer?
I can go first. Tim's been doing a lot talking. I feel as though we've done that. That's what we've done in this project. We've addressed a lot of the kind of the pinch points within the industry. From at the moment, to produce willow cuttings for planting, it's extremely laborious and manual process, with people having to go into the field with literally secateurs to cut the right size material. And then we've got the step planters, which there's nothing wrong with them, to be fair. They work, but if we are to plant on much larger scale, we're planting thousands of hectares rather than tens or 20s or even 100 or 2, we need to come up with a system that is scalable and doesn't require a huge amount of labor, because that is very difficult to get people to actually work in agriculture, particularly on the back of a machine in March and April, when it can be cold or snowing or hailing or whatever. So and that's what we've been trying to address with these autonomous robotic piece of equipment. And then obviously the harvester, which we've discussed, the main issues is just trying to get on the land to cut it and chop it, which has been a real challenge over the past few years. Having said that, this year's not been too bad. I would say the biggest challenge is there's just not enough crop in the ground at the moment to justify the investment or purchasing more equipment to do it.
I think the same thing applies really with the Miscanthus grass. Certainly on the planting side, it's not something that I'm too experienced with. We have done a little bit of planting there. The levels of what are going in the ground, or crop that's going in the ground, the equipment is sufficient for doing the job. On the harvesting side, I'm not seeing what we can do much different really. It's been trial and error with most of it. Before we started this webinar, one of the things that we were all discussing was fire suppressant, and I feel that's probably something that we need to address, because it is on the the foragers certainly, and maybe on the balers, because you are buying a flammable crop and harvest and chopping it as well, and there is a massive risk there. It's take a lot of time to clean the machines and sort of manage that risk really. So if we can, that's one area that we need to improve, and we will be looking to improve.
Thank you. So a question from the chat then. How often does something break, and like how often are you having to make running repairs in the field? Or I mean, does it feel like you're working the machines really, really hard, or is it a fairly gentle process?
Do you want to go first, Tim?
Yeah. No more than using it in a conventional way. One of the things about Miscanthus grass, or the area that we cover from Yorkshire right down to into Suffolk, is the amount of road miles that we do. And I think probably there's excessive tyre wear. We had a track rod end break this year, and I suspect that's just because it's spent too much time on the road, probably hitting curbs or potholes on the side of the road, particularly narrow roads in Norfolk. But the actual working of the machine, no, it's just if you keep on top of your servicing, not at all really, or maintenance.
Willow can be, obviously we have to guard the machine, which you don't really have to do with Miscanthus, because the willow is obviously quite a woody plant, and it can work its way into under panels, or as I said, into pull out pipes and things like that. So we've had a bit of willow jam between a rear prop shaft and a fuel tank before, which we got away with, but it was an eye opener, and we think, well, how on earth can we stop that from happening again? I think the biggest challenge is being able to harvest the willow at the right stage at the right time, and that's why I'm saying ideally you want to be harvesting around about 2.5 to 3.5 years old, when the crop is the ideal size. When you start missing a season or two, and suddenly the crop's 4.5, 5.5, up to 6 years old, and it's no longer 50 millimeters in diameter, some of it can be up to 90, 100 millimeters in diameter, that is when you start doing the real damage to machines, because they're just not designed to have pretty much tree trunks go through them. But if you can get the crop at the right time, no, it goes through really well. And I think that's going back to what we're trying to achieve with this new harvester, is allowing us to get on the field when they need to be harvested, rather than waiting a year or two because the weather conditions, the ground conditions aren't suitable for tractors and trailers.
Thank you. One more question in the chat, which is quite a specific one, from Dimitri. Would it be of interest for your companies to have an on-site setup to perform Miscanthus pyrolysis for oils and burnable gases?
Tim?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that. That's quite a question. I'm not quite sure. I think it probably would for the growers of these crops, but as for the contractor, not really. My sole interest is this, to help the farmer harvest his crop. So for me personally, no, but for the grower, I think yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing, isn't it? Is like, well, at what point do you try and add value to the material? Like, if somebody's dust extracting it and shrink wrapping it and selling it for equine budding, then their price is literally 10 times as much per ton. But it's that whole, how much do you do on site compared to sending it off site? And for some farmers with a bit of capital behind them, then maybe they can extract more revenue on farm. Okay, so in the absence of any further questions, I'd like to thank both speakers for their insights today. I've certainly learned a lot, despite having been in the field of Miscanthus for a while now. A little bit more on Biomass Connect. So we're going to have one more webinar probably in May, in conjunction with Energy Now. So that will be advertised via the newsletter if you are subscribed to the Biomass Connect newsletter at the moment. If you're not subscribed to the Biomass Connect newsletter, please do go to the website and you'll see the subscribe button. It being summer, hopefully soon, we will be out and about with Biomass Connect at a few events and shows, and then hopefully some of the hub demonstrator sites will also be having some open days, so you can come and visit the crop. We'll be carrying on the Biomass Connect project until December this year, so still plenty of opportunities to engage with us. And final words of thanks then to our partners in the project who are on the screen, and to our funders at DESNZ. And thank you for everybody for your participation, and yeah, do catch the webinar again on YouTube if that's of interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.